On we are here. How you doing, ladies and gentlemen? Great to see you. And today we're going to be talking about living honorably. And it is Tuesday, ladies and gentlemen. You know what that means. It is time to do the Tao now. Tuesday Tao, reading from Dr. Wayne W. Dyer's Wisdom of the Tao. I almost said Wisdom of the Ages because I've been thinking about that, ladies and gentlemen. But this is Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, which is some wisdom from the ages, ladies and gentlemen, but this is subtitled Living the Wisdom of the Tao. And so, living honorably. Couldn't we all use a little bit more of honorable living, ladies and gentlemen? Well, let's dive right into the 53rd verse of the Tao Te Ching and discuss and learn about this topic of living honorably. Verse 53 of the Tao Te Ching. If I have even just a little sense, I should walk in the great way, and my only fear would be straying. The great way is very smooth and straight, and yet the people prefer devious paths. That is why the court is corrupt. The fields lie in waste. The granaries are empty. The granaries are empty. Dressing magnificently, wearing a sharp sword, stuffing oneself with food and drink, amassing wealth to the extent of not knowing what to do with it, is being like a robber. I say this pomp at the expense of others, is like the boasting of thieves after a looting. This is not the Tao. Wow, ladies and gentlemen, that's a very fascinating one. I think this is the first verse in all of these that's, says this is not the Tao. Maybe except for the first one, saying, the Tao is not that which can be named. It's not one of the 10,000 things, ladies and gentlemen. And so the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. And even then, he's not stating this is not the Tao. And so that's a powerful ending there. But he describes all these things. The great way, and that being what it is we should strive for. And this Tao Te Ching being a teaching or a book of the way, and that way being a much higher quality of life, a much easier, maybe, way to exist and to flow through things, rather than always, like we talk about, striving and pushing. And very interesting how he describes that people prefer the devious paths. This is why the court is corrupt, and the fields lie in waste, and the granaries are empty. Dressing magnificently, wearing a sharp sword, stuffing oneself with food and drink, amassing wealth to the extent of not knowing what to do with it, is being like a robber. And so, very fascinating. Let us continue and dive into what Wayne Dyer has to teach us here today about this idea of living honorably and possibly having just a little sense that we should walk or live in the great way. Wayne Dyer begins by saying, imagine that you were able to view the world from a position of complete honor and oneness. Everywhere you looked, you saw the great way and saw all of it as you. From this perspective, every person who's ever existed or will ever exist is a part of you, birthed by your source. All of the life, the creatures, the land, the oceans, and the vegetation are connected by that source, by the Tao. From this perspective, your world would change dramatically. If a critical mass of humanity, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about the 100th monkey or the critical mass idea, that when you get enough things, whether it be cells or monkeys or, whatever it be, people in a group, that eventually you hit what is called in physics, or, I forget exactly, but you hit what is called a critical mass, where all of the things begin to align. based on the, behavior or thoughts or something of the majority. And so you hit this, from this perspective, our world would change dramatically. If a critical mass of humanity had the same perspective that was just described, this viewing the world from a position of complete honor and oneness, where everywhere you looked, you saw that all of it is you. But if critical mass hits this point, seeing the globe as a whole part of ourselves would translate to the same respect for every form of life that we have for our own lives, our own individual bodies. And this unity would make the scene that Lao-tzu is describing in this passage impossible. So this negative, the devious paths, the corrupt, the fields and waste, the granaries, dressing fancy, with a sword and gorging yourselves with food and drink and all of these things. If we were able to apply this new perspective that Wayne is describing here, this oneness view, this honor, this unity would make the scene that Lao-tzu was describing in the passage impossible. However, despite all of our technological advances, the words that the great Chinese master wrote 2,500 years ago still apply today, which is what makes studying the Tao such a fascinating thing. I hope you got yourself some tea, ladies and gentlemen, or a nice beverage, because this is just getting good. And I hope you find yourself comfortable, and able to focus in. May you create peaceful harmony as your life's purpose. Now, unfortunately, we were far removed. We are far removed, ladies and gentlemen, from walking this great way that was described 2,500 years ago to us. And for we continue to see great divisions, separateness rather than oneness, these great divisions rather than a sense of unified oneness. As Lao-tzu admonishes, Wayne continues saying at the end of this verse, that this is not the Tao, this separation and this division. One of my favorite translations of this 53rd verse of the Tao Te Ching, Wayne says, was written in 1944 by Bynner. He expresses it perfectly by saying it this way. See how fine the palaces, and see how poor the farms, how bare the peasants' granaries, while gentry wear embroideries, hiding sharpened arms. And the more they have, the more they seize. How can there be such men as these, who never hunger, never thirst, yet eat and drink until they burst? Wow, he put it in a nice rhyming pattern there. You can see, Wayne says, that these conditions still exist today. And I'll note here that the Tao Te Ching has many different translations from many individuals. That example just given to us from Bynner back in 1944. So Wayne continues by saying, you can see that these conditions still exist today. Whole continents of people experience starvation, while a few in positions of power live in opulence and grandeur. Weapons of destruction receive funding, while millions live in poverty. Leaders sit down to overflowing plenitude, while the masses scrounge around for ways to feed their families and to heat their homes. Heating their homes, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be something we think more and more about as we come into the colder months here on this side of the world. But, it's fascinating, the attention that Lao-tzu, despite having such spiritual, mystical guidance, or, a an example of spirituality and philosophy, goes into these deeper philosophies about, you know, the more physical things here in the world, about us dealing with each other and governments and, you know, societal issues. It's just interesting to me how he goes back to these points from time to time, because he really does have something to say that I agree with. But, you know, it's something to definitely hope and strive for a time when we have a long way to go, Wayne continues saying, before traversing that smooth and straight way of the Tao. And so before we still take these quote unquote devious paths that Lao-tzu described in his verse here, and we still see all too painful the results of these choices every day. But I'm not writing these words, Wayne says, to try to change the world in one fell swoop. Rather, I'm doing so to encourage you, to encourage me, and to encourage us, ladies and gentlemen, that we might, he says, I'm doing so to encourage you to change the way you see your world. So it's not so much, you know, let's go change the world. It's like, first we have to change the way we see the world, because we're looking at it in a wrong way. You know, I forget the great quote, but it's something like, you cannot solve a problem by coming at it from the same mindset. You have to first change your mindset about the problem in order to be able to think of a solution. That's not exactly how the quote goes, but it's a great one that when it pertains to this kind of thing, it's like, he goes, I'm not trying to change the world here by the words that I'm writing. I'm rather doing so to encourage us individuals to change the way that we see the world. And if we make that modification, others will gravitate towards this new way. And then we will actually begin to make change in the world, ladies and gentlemen, as a collective new way of viewing what it is that we're looking at. Remember, you change your thoughts and you change your life. You change the way you look at things, and the things that you're looking at begin to change right before your eyes. And, you know, this does have to do with simple practicality. Like when you change the way you think about, you begin to behave in a new way, which creates a new result. But there's also, you know, a more mystical, spiritual, magical way to think about this. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is a different topic. And we've talked about manifesting before in this series and on this channel. But I love finding those keys to manifesting, because they're out there in all these little tidbits of fantastic, timeless wisdom, ladies and gentlemen. If you're getting value, consider subscribing. And if you're already subscribed, then leave me a comment and smash that like button. It helps the algorithms give these videos to more people like yourself that probably need this. But so when we begin to change how we see our world, rather than trying to change the world first, you know, we got to change how we see the world. And then when enough of us do this, they'll gravitate towards each other and this idea of living honorably as well. When enough of us do this, we'll reach that critical mass that we described that will eliminate, quote unquote, the boasting of thieves after looting or after stealing. Begin by seeing yourself, Wayne says, as the environment. You are, as he puts it in his lectures, an enviro-organism. You are not an organism in an environment, but you are the environment. You are an enviro-organism. You know, they're one and the same thing. And so rather than as he says, see yourself as the environment rather than as an organism within it. I've even coined a word to describe when life forms are whole rather than separate. Enviro-organisms. And so understand that you can't survive apart from what it seems isn't part of you. A paradox, ladies and gentlemen, and we love those paradoxes. I'll say it one more time. Understand that you cannot survive apart from what it seems isn't part of you. For you absolutely are the air, the water, the plants, the animals, and everyone else on the planet. Change your worldview to one that completely understands that when anyone else is starving or living in poverty, then so are you. See yourself and all others, and you'll find the compassion, the love, and the willingness that replaces your belief in your uniqueness and differentness, your separation, that ego part of us that tends to see us as separate and different. Lao-tzu, Wayne continues, was obviously distressed by the conditions of hard-heartedness and indifference that he observed in ancient China. So he appealed to all who live to live honorably through an emulation of the Tao, rather than from the ego perspective of separateness. And now he asks you and me and all of us here today to change the way that we look at the blatant imbalances in our world, noting how our world changes to align with the Tao when we, especially individually, begin to live honorably in a way that has been described here today. Here's a suggestion, Wayne says, which we can apply to our life today. So if you're saying, this is great, Chase, but it's just not practical enough for me, like what do we really do about this conjecture? And to me, it's much more than conjecture, but if you feel that way, then I understand. I have empathy. That is a way that many could feel about these kind of ideas and these kind of sentences. It's like you're saying a lot of sentences, but so this is why you want to get this book or continue listening. I have the book linked in the description below the video if you expand that. But here is a suggestion in which we can attempt to apply this more practically in our life today. Wayne says, make compassion the essential foundation of your personal philosophy. And if you're still saying, well, what do you mean by make compassion the foundation of my personal philosophy? What is my personal philosophy? Well, that's up to each of us to decide. But Wayne puts it this way: feeling guilty about what you've amassed or wallowing in sadness over the plight of the starving won't change things. It will not. This is a great teaching just unto itself. Feeling guilty about what you've amassed or wallowing in sadness over the plight and the starving of what others do not have, focusing on the negative, will not change things. It will not create solutions. All you will do is probably create more of the things that you're focused on. But making compassion the essential foundation of your philosophy, of the way you're thinking about these things, will change things. This is one of the most significant ways of initiating the growth of a quote-unquote critical mass. As that mass grows, kind hearts and actions will realign larger groups. He says eventually our planet. Like-minded leaders will begin to emerge, and gross inconsistencies will be reduced and eventually diminished to a point near elimination. Mother Teresa was an outstanding example of how one person's way of seeing the world can change the world itself. Quote, in each person I see, she said, I see the face of Christ in one of his more distressing disguises. We've mentioned this before. This is a good one. In the face of each person I see the face of God in all of his distressing disguises. And it's weird there, Wayne put an emphasis on the I and in. There's like a italics around I in the word in there. So in each, and then he puts the same around person I see. I see the face of Christ in one of his more distressing disguises. So, quote unquote, walk in the great way. Here, once again, we're talking about how we can do this. Like, how do we apply this? And the answer is make compassion your way of thinking about things, your way of looking, understanding this connection, this oneness, but, or at least attempting to, have that become a part of the way you see life. Walk in the great way, quote unquote, by doing charity work or supporting candidates for public office who embody compassionate action. And vow to make a difference on a daily basis throughout your life, which might be as simple as refusing to join in denouncing others or categorizing people as evil or defective or this person's the worst for that reason. And it's like the more time you spend on this negativity, you're just going in a circle of muck. It's like if you want to get out of the swamp, ladies and gentlemen, you don't want to go in circles, swirls in circles, swirkles, ladies and gentlemen. We needed a little comedic levity there. But you know what I'm saying? It's like in order to find a positive result, we cannot focus on the negative. This goes back to how do we change the world? Well, first, we have to come at it with a new mindset, a new way of looking at it. And so you don't focus on the negative to create a positive result. First, you have to find a new way. Walk in the great ways, which is what is being described here today. But after all, so many of the wars that currently rage on our planet are rooted in, whether it be religious or some kind of hatred that perpetuates the imbalances pointed out in this verse of the Tao Te Ching. In the following excerpt from the Quran, or the Quran, however you say it, the great prophet Muhammad tells the followers of Islam to practice compassionate action. You can use his teaching to make a daily difference during your own life. It says here, quote unquote, behave beneficially towards the neighbor that is a kinsman and the neighbor that is a stranger and the companion by your side. He who behaves ill toward his neighbor is not a believer, nor can ever be one. One who eats his fill while his neighbor is hungry by his side is not a believer. And so the reason I love this book so much and have been sharing it here for you is to increase the quality of our lives, but because Wayne put it in such a format that there's practicality at the end, as we just discussed, and now he'll put in a new way, which is at the end of each of these chapters, and there's a short little bit about how we can do the Tao now. Do the Tao now. Wayne says, make a daily practice of opening your heart in compassion when you see someone less fortunate than yourself. Give him or her a silent blessing rather than a thought of scorn, ridicule, blame, or indifference. Do the same when you learn how many of them were killed in any skirmish. Rather than rejoicing about the dead enemies, say a silent prayer of love and compassion. And finally, live honorably based on what we've learned here today. It, quote unquote, just takes a little sense. It just takes a little common sense, ladies and gentlemen. Boom to wisdom. Boom to knowledge. Boom to the wisdom of the Tao, ladies and gentlemen. That was a really good one. That was like how to discover oneness. and change the world. Next week's Tuesday Tao, and I took a week off last week, as you may have noticed or realized, because we finished Wednesday Wisdom before, and well, figured it was just that time, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, we were on the 53rd verse, and isn't there 52 weeks in a year? Shouldn't it have already been a year by now? That's kind of odd, especially since I've skipped a couple weeks. Maybe I'm off on that, but that is odd, ladies and gentlemen. Did we start this back in November? Anyways, next week's, ladies and gentlemen, will be living as if your life makes a difference. And it does, ladies and gentlemen. And we're going to figure out how our lives do make a difference, because it's interesting. We just kind of discussed that here today. Boom to wisdom, boom to knowledge. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, to seek to achieve and maintain happy blah blah blah. Dang it. I hope you love it when I mess up like that, because it's pretty funny, because I don't edit these things. I just kind of go with it. And maybe that's one of the challenges or practices of the Tao. So remember, ladies and gentlemen, to seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment. And remember to seek to discover the hidden wisdom of the ages. And most importantly, begin to make happiness the way. There is no way to happiness. It is the way. And when you can begin to do that, make it what it is that you bring to life, then whatever it is we've been telling ourselves, oh, I'll be happy when I get there, but I can't be now, that begins to turn around and change, ladies and gentlemen, because then we are there now. And then the entire journey of getting there is also enjoyable and wonderful, ladies and gentlemen. And so hopefully we can get there and begin to maintain that ability of creating and bringing happiness, contentment, peace. That's what Wayne said one time. He said, my teacher and my mentor said that the definition of enlightenment was being immersed in and surrounded by peace at all times. I don't think any of us can really, get to that level of mastery unless we practice for 50 lifetimes. But making that the way, ladies and gentlemen, is the ultimate key. And also, if you'd like to support me, down here below the video, there is a description, and you can expand the description. And linked in the description below, I have this book, so you can get it for yourself to put it on your shelf. And I also have my landscape paintings linked there as well in my Etsy shop, and a link to C60 Purple Power, which is the most powerful antioxidant. And I have personally been using it for many years now, ladies and gentlemen. So with all that said, once again, may you make your goal and your purpose and your creation peaceful harmony as our life's purpose. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. I appreciate and love all of you. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow on a new series and a new adventure. And we'll see which direction we go, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.